Shalom, everybody. I'm Joel Blackford. This is Blackford Talks Prophecy. Thank you for joining us. Please click if you can hear us. Sometimes we have problems, and I've had some problems with X lately too, especially anybody on X. I'd like to know if it's working. I am privileged to interview Dinah Dye, and she has a new book out called The Greatest Exodus. And I'd love to just hand things over to her. Whoop, that's the wrong screen. Here she is. Here's Dinah. And Dinah, I'd like you to introduce yourself to the audience and tell us who you are and what you believe in, and a little bit about that testimony. So please, Dinah, tell us.
Well, I'm still trying to figure out who I am, right? I think it takes a
Yes,
lifetime, right?
yes.
Yeah, so I'm Dr. Dinah Dye, and I grew up in Ottawa, Canada, a very long time ago. We won't give you the date on that. And into a Jewish family. So that was obviously a major part of our lives. Passover was really the sort of the get together part of the family when those that lived in different parts of the city, I lived in Ottawa, got together. So Passover was really sort of a really important marker for me. And we were kind of discussing this before the show. Growing up in the 50s, this is very much post World War II, post Holocaust. And that was the point of discussion at our Passover table. And as you know, a true Jewish Passover is at least 5 hours. And so there's a lot of dialogue uh, and discussion that went on there. But that was my frame of reference. And so, in some ways, I think I was obsessed with it. I read a lot about the Holocaust. Growing up, I always watched movies, World War II movies. I still do. I drive my husband crazy. So he said, not another World War II movie. But I feel it's really important, especially because I think we're headed to the same place. And I do believe that a new Holocaust is ahead of us. But back to my story, I attended an Orthodox Jewish summer camp. I went to Hebrew school for a number of years. At that point, my family was somewhat religious. As I grew older, they sort of distanced themselves from the Jewish faith, and I ended up becoming a quote, born again Christian, unquote. But we lived in a neighborhood that was very Gentile, and we had in our school religion class for 20 minutes each day. And so the teacher would say, well, Dinah, you can leave the class since you're Jewish and everybody else is not. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable, but I was too embarrassed to get up and walk out of the class. So I just sat and listened. And that was a good thing because I did get to hear things about the New Testament. And my friends would compete over who was taking me to church at Christmas, if you will. My mother thought that was just fine. So I learned and I heard about someone named Jesus. I didn't quite understand it all, and I didn't know how it intersected with my own faith. But I think I parked those seeds for a while and they took root many years later. So, a quick jump ahead. I grew up in Ottawa, a town in which I did not like. It's the capital of Canada, so you can imagine, filled with bureaucracy and members of parliament. It was an unhappy place for me in some ways. Although I did love my upbringing, and I was very involved in a lot of different things. But as a town, as a city, I did not like living there, so I left as soon as I could. And I was a hippie extraordinaire. I traveled for literally 5 years, lived out of a 14-pound backpack, traveled all over Europe and the Middle East, and actually ended up in Central America. And really, it was a search, a soul search for who am I? And I sort of brought that up at the beginning of the show. I'm still trying to figure that out. But it was an important period in my own life as I struggled to figure out, is there a God? Who is God? How does he move in my own life? Is he real? Does it matter? Who am I? All those questions that you ask. I got to spend 5 years trying to figure it out. And my travels brought me through a lot of very interesting experiences. I can't really go into them now. I am working on a book that will sort of define my story. And I'm going to call it The Wandering Jew because I did a lot of wandering in those years.
I used to
And
grow a plant like that. It was a wandering Jew. I used to cut
yeah,
slips off it and regrow it. It was great.
yeah, it just grows like gangbusters, doesn't it? So,
Yes, it does.
yeah, so, for example, I was in Greece, in Athens, when the tanks rolled in. There was a student uprising, and there were trying to push off the military junta. And I was in the middle of the square the day the tanks came in and firing and smoke. And, everybody just jumped up from the table. We were in Syntagma Square and raced out of there. I ended up finding my way down to Piraeus Harbor and taking a boat to Barcelona to get out of there. That was one incident. When I landed in London, the first day I was in the Victoria Tube Station, headed out, and it blew up. It was an IRA bomb. So there were myriads of examples like that. I did end up in Israel, just after the Yom Kippur War in 1974, and that was quite an interesting experience. I lived on a kibbutz for a few months and traveled around the country. Went up into the Golan Heights, saw the remains of that war. There were mines everywhere. Uh, it was a very interesting time. I actually had a dream while on the kibbutz. I don't won't go into too much detail, but I dreamt that these terrorists dressed as hippies had come on to our own kibbutz. I was on Degania Aleph, which is at the bottom of the Sea of Galilee, and actually ended up murdering a number of people. Now, that was in a dream, but it wasn't but a week or two later that something similar had actually happened up north in Israel. There was some students in a school, and these terrorists had broke in and murdered a number of these students dressed as hippies. So that was kind of weird. I had some of these very strange experiences. I think the Lord was showing me things.
Well, I think that happens more with Jewish believers in Yeshua. They see either Yeshua or they see visions about Yeshua or whatever else. It just seems to be when I interview Jewish people that they came across via dreams, visions, things like that. Do you think that's the case with you?
I do. I don't want to go into all of them, but there were a number in my own life, and I couldn't quite figure out what was going on. I didn't have a faith at that point, but I could
Right.
tell there's certainly that the hand of God was on me because I was in so many places. It was very volatile in Europe in the 70s, 73 through 75. There were a lot of uprisings and coups and, like I said, military juntas. And somehow I'd find myself there, and then somehow, later I recognized that the hand of God was on me, protecting me. This stupid hippie in Europe doesn't know what's going on. So I do think that there is something to that. Um, and so I eventually came back to Ottawa. I was not very happy to be there. And so I was born in the United States. I ended up leaving and eventually long route. I went down to Guatemala. I lived down there for a number of years until the Guatemalan earthquake that I was in. I actually had a dream about that about a week before it happened. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up to the ground shaking, and I was kind of thrown out of my bed. The front wall of our home collapsed, and we were forced to live out in the fields for about a month. We couldn't get out of the country. So that earthquake was in 1974. Was it 76? I can't remember. Somebody will check me on that. And that was actually, I called it a moving experience, but it took me months to get over that. It was very challenging. And so after that, I went up to San Francisco, and I lived with a bunch of hippies in San Francisco, and we were communists at the time.
Oh
And
no, you were a communist too. Oh, no. Oh, you
following
needed to be
Che
saved.
Guevara in San Francisco, oh
Oh,
my goodness.
goodness.
And I got tired of that and ended up in Taos, New Mexico, a
Okay,
far
okay,
cry from San Francisco.
sure.
And the sort of the journey continued. And here's just a quick snapshot. I was still in search. I was still a hippie. I was still
Yeah,
involved in the new age and still confused.
yeah.
And somebody told me that if I went to the Quimby Center, which was down south in a town called Alamogordo, then I would have a past life reading and I would have crystals
Ooh.
waved over me and maybe I could figure out who I was.
And
So I call it,
ayahuasca and stuff like that. Yeah.
yeah, I call
Okay.
it God's last laugh on me
Oh,
because the person that did the past life reading told me that in my last life, and you understand I don't believe in reincarnation, but in my last life, I was a disciple of Christ in
oh,
Israel.
oh my.
And that I ended up in the catacombs in Rome with Peter. I was like, well, I thought that was just very cool. So
Okay.
it sort of it planted some seeds, and somebody at one point handed me a Bible. So I didn't really read it because I was curious about God. I read it because somebody told me in my last life I was a Christian in Israel, right? So I read the whole thing cover to cover in about a week. And when I got to the story of the woman caught in the act of adultery, that was kind of my moment, that where I recognized that here was this Messiah, Yeshua, King, who sort of fulfilled everything that I had thought in my own head, that the message was a message of love, that it was easy to understand, and that it would be for everyone. And none of the other New Age philosophies that I was involved in checked any of those boxes except for this. And one sort of interesting aside, some friends of ours, they were part of an ashram, which was not too far from the house I lived in Taos. And they had invited all of us up for this sort of special day. And so this, I don't know if you remember Ram Dass, Baba Ram Dass, who was a
No,
disciple
maybe I
of,
don't want to.
maybe not.
I
He
think
was
I
a
think we're going to
disciple of,
India. We're
yeah,
doing Hindu stuff, right? Yeah,
yeah.
that's what I thought.
Yeah,
Ashram.
he
Okay.
was he worshipped the monkey god Hanuman. He was a disciple of Timothy
Obama's
Leary.
favorite god. Yeah,
Yeah.
Obama carries Hanuman every day.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly right. So
yeah.
we went up on this gorgeous September day, and there was a big, great celebration. And
Okay.
they had commissioned the statue of Hanuman to be constructed in Sri Lanka, and they had flown it over to San Francisco. And from San Francisco, they were bringing it into Taos and for the unveiling. So we're all standing there, and there it comes out in this sort of wooden box, and they begin to take off, the slats of the wooden box, and sort of out appeared this marble statue of Hanuman, the monkey god. It was just gaudy and dressed sort of in this orangish outfit, white marble, holding a scepter. And at that very moment, everyone there bowed down to that god. And I stood there and I looked at my friend Jane, who had been with me in some of my travels, and I heard very clearly the voice of the Lord. Only time in my whole life I ever heard an
Okay.
actual audible
Okay.
voice. And I
Okay.
heard, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." And
Sure.
we looked at each other and we stood there, and I knew that I knew. And I know now that since I did not cross over that threshold to bow down to that monkey god, that God preserved me and he had a journey for me and he had a task for me. And I think that I was able to follow that. So that was sort of all of, the hippie world, etc.
So I live next door to Minneapolis, and it's crazy over there.
Oh, yeah.
So, a few years ago, I owned my own copier company, and some people needed a rental in Minneapolis for their political convention, and they contacted me, and I brought it over on a Saturday and set it all up, and they didn't thank me; they worshipped me. It was so bizarre, and it
Yeah.
grossed me out. It's like, what is wrong with you? And they kept on saying something like, let's worship him, and of course I didn't receive it, but it was so freakish, but it's so standard for them. They just worship stuff. They
Yeah.
don't care.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very bizarre. So that was kind of the end of the season and the beginning of a new season. And I formally announced my dedication to Yeshua the Messiah in a church. I was in the Assemblies of God church for a number of years.
Oh, you're charismatic.
I
Oi.
was charismatic. Yeah, I learned, but I do appreciate those years. I appreciate what I learned, and I think I better understand, how to reach people between the New and the Old Testament, the Tanakh and the Brit Hadashah. And I value those years of what I learned and understand the theology that and the doctrine they were teaching. I can't say that I agreed with it all, but it helped me better in my own life understand, what I'm doing, what I'm sharing, and how I can communicate to others in a way, knowing where they're coming from, but in a way to try to break through some of that. And so, many years there, got married, had kids, homeschooled my kids. I was very politically active, especially during the 90s, because there was a lot going on against homeschoolers. So
Okay.
I had times where I spoke at the legislature on behalf of homeschooling. So a lot of that. And, just settled down into home life and marriage, etc., and life in the church at that time. And then fast forward into the 2000s, Well, in the middle of the 90s, I went back to school because I never finished school.
Okay.
I dropped out of university, in those years. Well, I won't go into the details of that, but
No, we don't want to know.
nothing fulfilling there. But
Right.
I never got my degree. So I went back and finished. Actually, went to Southwestern Assemblies of God University and
Oh,
got my
wow.
bachelor's, and
Okay.
then
Okay.
eventually got master's and my doctor of ministry. I don't have a PhD, I have a doctor of ministry here in
Okay.
Albuquerque, Trinity Southwest University. And so then uh, my professor, she had reached out to God's Learning Channel. I don't know if you remember them
Oh,
down
yeah.
in
I remember them.
Texas.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And she pitched them this idea of putting together these sort of 30-minute shows. She named her organization Bible Interact, and I joined on with her, and they invited us to do a regular show down there. Well, then one thing sort of led to another, and they actually gave me my own show, and
Ooh.
I was on their program Light of the Southwest a number of times. And from that, many doors opened in the sort of Messianic Jewish world with the Hebrew Roots Network and Lion and Lamb Ministries and
Oh, you know
Sun
Monty.
Broadcasting in Albuquerque. And
Okay. You know Monty Judah?
yeah, yeah.
Okay,
I
cool.
spoke there at a number of Sukkots back in the day. So there, a lot of doors opened for me because of GLC, because of what they had
Good.
offered.
Okay.
So I just started that trajectory, right?
Sure.
And then I guess COVID hit and everything fell apart, right?
Yeah.
Up until that
Yeah.
point, I had written two books, The Temple Revealed in
Okay.
Creation
Okay.
and The Temple Revealed in the Garden. I think it's been about 10, 15 years now where I really understood that the paradigm, the pattern of the temple was very important and actually one of the most significant parts of the Bible itself, the place of God's dwelling, his
Mm.
presence. And understanding in the ancient world, temples were everything. They were on top of mountains, they were important places, and that people reading the Bible were missing this. And so I really wanted to lay down the first sort of 10, 11 chapters of the Bible and establish that pattern so that people could see more clearly this picture of temple all the way through scripture. And so I did the creation, the garden, and Noah's Ark, which because Noah's Ark is a perfect pattern of temple and place of presence of God. And once I finished that trilogy, I thought, well, I really feel that I have given the basic foundation of how to look at a temple. And I think people can see that pattern all the way through scripture. So I sort of stopped. COVID hit, everything dried up, no more speaking engagements, no more. I didn't do much more TV, and I pretty well felt like I was washed up in the whole
Right.
messianic world.
Yeah.
And had a season of I don't know who I am, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know where I'm going, Lord, what? Right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, I've been through that. Look behind me. There's a picture for Beth Hesed Sabbath Fellowship. We locked the door back in 2020 because we're in Minnesota and nothing is legal in Minnesota. And
right.
so I kept it alive virtually, so we
Yeah,
don't meet physically. I do attend other fellowships in town here at times, but the main thing is, yeah, Beth Hesed is basically defunct unless
okay.
something like a miracle happens. But I get it that 2020, it changed everything in our
Changed
movement.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah. But
And
maybe that's good.
the fruit of it I still haven't figured out. Some of it just still makes me mad. We were fortunate. We had a community here in what we call the East Mountains of New Mexico, and we
Sure.
simply ignored the governor's orders and everyone else, and we continued to meet.
God bless you.
Yes. And it's interesting because that's when our community grew the most. Like
Yeah.
we were going and
Persecution.
blowing. That's like that pressure, that persecution. We're not following these orders. And I would just laugh because we had potlucks every week. And I mean, we had, I don't know, 65 kids under the age of 12. And so, the kids, they got their hands in all the food and,
Yeah.
they're grabbing stuff. It
Yeah.
was, as far as cleanliness went, and
Yeah.
trying to keep,
Boy,
it was really pretty funny. And I
wipe
just
your
laughed
nose, grab your
because
food.
nobody, got really sick in our
Right.
entire community.
Well, and for me, I got sick. I lost my sense of taste
Ah,
and
yeah.
smell, and I've never really gotten my voice back. It's not the same
Interesting.
voice that I used to
Yeah.
have. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, some things last forever.
Oh,
I lost 20 pounds in about 2 weeks. I couldn't eat. If I can't taste it, I can't eat it.
well, I related it to the strengths of being a hippie because you're totally anti-establishment and you're not
Right.
following the party line and you don't care what the government
Yeah.
said. And
Yeah.
I said, I have been true to myself because I'm still doing the same thing. I'm anti-establishment. I'm not
I
following
know.
the government line. We're not doing this.
Yeah. There is something funny about that, and it's odd because when you look at Bill and Hillary and other people that are just they're well, actually, they're fairly close to your age, but the main
Yes,
thing is that they were anti-establishment, but now they are the establishment.
right, right. Well, I'm consistent. So I
Yeah.
remain true to myself. So my husband and I laugh about that because we were both, super hippies at the
He was a
time.
hippie
So
too?
yeah.
Oh, I figured it was more like The Odd Couple where
Oh,
he
no,
was
no, no.
no.
We mano a mano, we were both serious hippies. So by the time we got married, we sort of had left that lifestyle. And as I said, we were actually in a church for quite a number of years. So we did come around, but we're still, we still push against and we resist wherever we can when we see things that oppression and things that are unfair and unjust. We speak out and we push against it.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure, yeah. So some things work no matter
Yes.
which side you're on.
Yep.
Unfortunately, in Minneapolis, it's not working so well. We have people being hurt,
Yeah.
and it's too bad because ultimately we do have to follow the laws. I mean, when you protested, you generally, when you were a hippie, you generally followed the laws,
Oh,
right? You
well,
were not.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It would never occur to me to be violent or, to do it.
Yeah.
The things I see now, I don't even know where that comes from in somebody's spirit. Like,
Mm,
how do you, how do you even act like that? No, we were, peaceful protesters for sure, making our point, but, never violated the law or anything like that. So
okay.
I didn't go
Interesting.
to jail.
Mm, that's good. Wow.
Not for that,
Okay.
anyways.
Okay. We don't want to
So,
go there either.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
but you
yeah,
cleaned up your act, you
yeah.
became a believer,
Yeah.
you became a charismatic. Are you still charismatic or are you kind of in the middle someplace?
Um, I don't really have a label for myself anymore. Honestly, I don't even know what I am anymore. I wouldn't say that I, in as a person, I'm not very overly expressive, so the charismatic thing never really stuck with me. I'm a
Yeah.
very
Okay.
practical person, very logical, very organized, and that's just sort of my MO. That's how I see the world. So I have remained the same, and my goal and desire is for things to make sense. And so when people go off the deep end with stuff and it doesn't make sense to me, then I can't embrace it until I figure it out for myself. And then once I do, I try to find a way to explain it to others in a logical way that makes sense to them,
Sure.
which I
Sure.
think is one of the reasons that many people do embrace my work and the ministry that I'm doing because they just want it to make sense.
Okay, so let's make sense about your book. So we've got The Greatest Exodus. What's the book about? Please show us your
Here
book.
it
Yeah.
is.
Okay, yep.
Yes.
Let
I
me
love the
go big
cover.
screen. Keep
Yes.
it up one more
Okay.
time so people can see it. There you go. Okay,
All right.
good.
The Greatest
And it's
Exodus,
backward.
a
This is
divine warrior tradition.
okay.
So
So what does
I'll
that mean?
back up. After I was in that season of Lord, who am I? What am I? I have no idea what you want from me. Am I washed up? I'm at this age. That's it. It's over. And I began to do a lot of work and realized the New Testament was classically explaining the Exodus story. So after sort of the temple pattern, and then I did a whole series on creation pattern, a lot of different patterns, I realized that the Exodus story was being replayed in the New Testament. Not exactly in the way you would expect, but especially in the book of Matthew, but really everywhere in Acts, Revelation, take your pick. So I spent a lot of time just really analyzing that, thinking about that, trying to like, Lord, what are you trying to say to me on all this? And so I sort of got excited once again about studying and about writing and about trying to put things together. I thought, I really do need to show how the Exodus operates in the New Testament. So I started writing, I guess it would have been around January of 2025. And I kind of settled into it. And then are you familiar with the Bible Project, guys? The folks there?
Somewhat. I don't know who they are, but I've read their documentation. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, they do a bang up job, especially on helping people to understand the ancient Near East culture and sort of
Sure.
the cultural context of the scriptures. And I think the scholars there have done an excellent job. Well, they put out, I don't know, I think a 12 or 14-hour series on the Exodus. And I'm going, you've got to be kidding. So I'm thinking, well, they just took the wind out of my sails, and I sat there for like a month trying to figure out how am I going to write about something. I know that the Lord, you have put it in me, but I don't want to do the same thing they just did. They just did a great job. Like, I don't want to reinvent the wheel here. And I was doing some other reading, and then it just sort of began to click where I started to see what I call the sort of combat myth in the ancient world, and I
Okay.
saw it expressed in the Exodus story. And so, along with the combat myth, just came sort of the whole program. And so, I wrote it out step by step. Um, and it's a lot in a lot of places in the Bible. Not every step is in every place. I want people to understand that. But sort of let me encapsulate it by saying how these creation stories worked in the ancient Near East world is sort of chaos would rise up. There's some type of chaos figure, and then against that chaos, another figure would rise up to defeat that figure. And there was always some kind of war, battle, combat, some sort of violent action that resulted in the creation of something. And so, what's unique about the Bible is the Bible brings forth life not through combat and violence, but through the Word of God, through the Spirit of God. And the contrast could not be greater. So, you have these two vying for power, one has to defeat the other. So, in the case of the divine warrior, Yahweh, he would defeat the chaos figure. And the result of that is that the divine warrior would receive for defeating the chaos a temple. So a temple would be built for him, and then this process would go along with the temple, in which a herald would come and proclaim the divine warriors defeated the chaos or whatever figure or enemy that there was. And then there'd be this proclamation, and then there would come a great procession as the divine warrior king would be led in procession to the throne. And the throne would be located on a mountain, and they would ascend the mountain. And on the mountaintop, there would be some sort of meal, a covenant meal, to confirm that the divine warrior had defeated the enemy. That's just sort of a quick synopsis. Well, then I began to realize that all of this language was all through the Old Testament, especially laid out in the Exodus story. The entire pattern is there in the Exodus story, and then you would see glimpses of it in the Psalms and in the prophets. Just it would be everywhere. I thought, I think there's something here. There's something more here. And so then I started to look through that lens into the New Testament and looking at Yeshua, Jesus the Messiah, as this divine warrior figure who defeats the Satan, say, in the wilderness. And so the whole story of the Exodus is then replayed. Yeshua as the Moses 2.0, Yeshua also fulfilling the role of Israel. What Israel did, Yeshua did in perfection, if you will, when we get to the New Testament. And then we see all these examples, the herald that would proclaim that he is the divine king, like John the Baptist would come and declare, and he would be sort of the herald to declare the kingdom is coming, and here is the Messiah. And you would just see all the procession, like the before Passover, when they're waving the palm fronds, right, and the triumphal entry, very much a processional. Now he goes to the temple, of course, and they're not ready for him. And that I write about all that in the book. I write about the mountains that are in Matthew, because each of the seven mountains has a specific meaning and purpose in the process. Just his whole enthronement, his death, burial, and resurrection, and his ascension, onto the Mount of Olives and this enthronement ritual and the meal, of course, the Passover meal. So all of these elements that I've shared in the Exodus story pop up in the New Testament through Yeshua the Messiah, and then eventually, really, through the rest of the book, so of the scriptures there. So that's just kind of it in a nutshell. I mean, there's way more obviously than that, but that's the sort of brief overview.
I hope I didn't disturb you. I was digging through my Chumash, which is my you're an Orthodox Jew, you know it. I'm sure you know what it is. So
I
anyway,
do.
it's yeah, it's the Pentateuch, the first five books of the Bible, but it's very Orthodox. Anyway, the point is there is this section where the Israelites show up when Pharaoh's going to show up to and meet them at the edge of the sea, and they are encamped before Baal
Right. Saphon.
the north, the Zaphon, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I was trying to find that, and so it should have been chapter 10, but I can't find it now. So anyway, the point is, there is that Baal, the Lord of the North, sitting there, and there's this huge fight going on, spiritual,
Yes.
so to speak,
Yes.
and that's kind of what you're describing,
Yeah.
and then you're carrying it forward in terms of Yeshua. So let's do Baal Zephon first. So you're going to lay out that it's our God versus Baal Zephon, but the people have to witness it. Is that how it works? Is
Well,
that what they
Baal
do?
Zephon is actually, so typically the divine warrior is considered to be a storm god.
Oh,
So over lightning and thunder and all that sort of thing. And certainly we see Yahweh functioning that way. So
oh
Baal
yeah.
Zephon is the same sort of storm god in the Canaanite. And so
Okay,
he's doing
okay,
the same sort of thing. Uh, it's similar in all of these different cultures and all of these different empires. They do the same thing. The point that we want to make is that Yahweh is sort of functioning in the same way, but the way he creates, the way he brings forth life is not by defeating an enemy and beating him to death violently in combat. That's the significant difference. All those gods defeat other gods with this violent combat. And we call it combat myth, and it's everywhere present in the ancient cultures from Mesopotamia to
okay.
Egypt to the ancient Sumerians and Akkadians and Assyrians and Persians. All of them
Interesting.
have this structure, but the Bible is different because it's not a combat myth with violence. It is the creation story with the word and the spirit. That's
Well,
the key.
Pharaoh did get a mikvah before he died.
He did get a giant mikvah and all his army.
That's a big
That's
mikvah.
Yeah, so the whole
Baptism.
Exodus 14:15, laying out the story of them by
Yeah,
the sea, and the
yeah,
dry ground appearing is a replay of the creation story when the land and sea separate, and
yeah.
then you see that replayed when they cross over the Jordan and the waters separate and they go through on dry ground. And then we see the same thing in Matthew chapter 1. Yeshua is immersed, and then he is immediately sent into the wilderness to do battle with the chaos figure, the adversary Hasatan. And at the location of where his immersion is the same location in which Joshua and company cross over into
Yes,
the land. All of
yes.
the geography really matters, and people don't think about that. But God is lining everything up perfectly to replay everything that he did almost in reverse the way he did it in the Exodus story.
You're going chiastic on me here?
Oh yeah, it's massive
Okay,
chiasm.
okay, all right, all right.
And I do outline several of the chiasms in my book.
Okay.
You, you need to read them. They're a little more complicated than just sort of chiasms are hard to describe in a
Oh,
podcast.
it's
It's
impossible. Please
yeah,
don't.
yeah.
Um,
So
um,
there are multiple layers of chiasms and chiasms that are reversals. So I show Yeshua's story, forward and backward that matches David's story, forward and backward, up over the Mount of Olives and down the other side and across the Jordan River. David goes, remember when he's running from
yeah,
Absalom,
yeah,
and then he
yeah.
comes back. So Yeshua kind of does similar things, but I do lay it out in my book, and I take my time explaining it. So hopefully folks will read it and it'll make sense to them. But there's a lot of that in scripture.
You're saying that Moses and the Israelites would have been somewhat aware of the other cultures and their war gods and their storm gods and other things like that. And I always think of them as being more pristine because they're slaves in Egypt. How
Yeah.
would they know much history? But you're saying they would have known.
Obviously I wasn't there, but
Right.
there's no way those influences, those other cultures, the Mesopotamian cultures, are going to have influence into the Egyptian cultures and back. There are similarities, they're not exact, obviously, but there are similarities. They structure their worlds in similar ways. But again, every single one of these ancient Near East cultures were born through combat myth. And the
Okay.
story of combat myth and the violence that goes with it, like when Marduk is the god of Babylon in the Neo-Babylonian period, he does he acts against Tiamat and cuts her in half, slices and dices her, and splits her body. And so this violence and this splitting and this trampling, all of these they're found all through the ancient world. And so when he splits her body, half goes to the waters above, half to the waters below. But it's a very
Okay.
violent act. And
Okay.
eventually the Babylonian state is formed, and Marduk is the chief pantheon, chief
Yeah.
god of the pantheon of Babylon.
Yep.
So it's everywhere, and that's what the Bible brings it up too. And so if we don't know what we're looking for, and we can kind of make a mistake over what God is doing and how he's functioning as divine warrior and what the purpose of that is, and ultimately is to restore a kingdom or bring about a kingdom where the rightful king is ruling on the throne and bringing his empire to rest.
Okay, so Karen Trudeau asks you, states, chapter 11 of the greatest Exodus was amazing. Do you know what she's talking about, what she's referencing in your book?
I'm not sure, but honestly, I got to reread my book. But chapter
Okay,
11 is the final chapter, which brings it all together. And I
okay,
try
okay,
to, one of the things I do in chapter 11 is I go not in a lot of detail, but because people are always fascinated by the book of Revelation, of course.
right,
And
yeah,
I outline how all of these facets of the combat myth are in the book of Revelation, and I show where they are. And so Revelation is a classic
Can we go there?
example of
Can we go
combat
there?
myth.
Can we?
Can we what?
Can we go with Revelation 11 a little bit? Actually, it would be 9 and 12. But can we talk about Revelation?
If you want to, what is it?
Oh,
I
well,
like I
okay.
said, I didn't go into. Let me just because I've got my book
Yeah.
here.
Okay,
Like I
yeah.
said,
Talk about 11 first and then, yep.
I half the time I can't remember what I wrote. I have to
Okay.
reread it
So this is
myself.
your last chapter.
I
Okay.
know it's my last chapter. So let me try to find it here. The sea was no more. I think that's where I have it. Um, I purposely, I've told you that prophecy is not my deal. It's really not
Oh,
my lane. So I didn't really spend much
well, but
time.
you brought it up, so
Well, let me just quickly. So I mentioned this is in chapter 11, the sea was no more, and I
yeah,
start with the chaos figure that we've been
sure, yeah,
talking
yeah,
about,
yep.
which that would essentially be the sea, right?
Okay,
And out
yeah,
of the
the
sea
sea is
comes the
chaos.
the beast and
Yep, yep,
etc. And of course, all of this is very much tied to imperial cult, the imperial cult of Rome. And then we have a
sure,
second beast that comes out of the land, out of the earth, and I talk about it talks about Leviathan, the fleeing
sure,
serpent, etc. And we
sure,
can see
yep,
that in Isaiah and various
yeah,
other places. And
sure.
then I mentioned number two, the divine warrior. And that's going to be in Revelation 12, where we have the child born from the
Oh,
woman
yeah,
who
oh,
is
yeah,
Israel, right?
oh,
And
yeah,
then the
sure.
water, the serpent
Water, sure.
tries to
Spewing the
drown.
water,
And
sure,
then
yep,
we have all kinds of battles. So we've got the divine warrior and the chaos figure doing battle, which is
sure.
really what most of Revelation is this crazy battle, right? Taking on different forms, political, cosmic, spiritual, and Revelation
Oh, no, we lost her.
here.
She's back. She's
She's
back.
I told you it might happen. We're under major wind advisory here.
I
So
heard Colorado is crazy. They're having like derechos and things like that. And
it's
you're not
bad
that
here.
far
It's
away.
really bad here. I'm out in the
Okay.
East Mountains, and and they've
Near
got
the
terrible
East Mountains.
fires in Texas and Oklahoma.
Yeah.
It's extreme.
Okay.
So these battles, the Revelation gives you sort of the minutia, the details of these battles. It kind of fills that in. And then, of course, you have the victory of the Lamb, chapters
Sure.
4 and 5, speaking of the throne. He's on the
Sure.
throne on the mountain. And of course, on the top of the mountain is where temples were located and the place where the divine warrior God would take his seat on the throne. So we have all
Sure.
of that in there. And then we have, the proclamation, the gospel, the heralds. And we see that also through Revelation. Speaking of the good news is the good news is not necessarily how we think of it. It's like Jesus died for my sins and I'm not going to hell. But basically, the good news is that the divine warrior king has defeated the enemy.
Okay.
And because all is at rest, the salvation is of all the people. The people can
Okay.
rest now because the rightful king is on the throne. That's more or less the good news versus kind of how we see it today. And then we have, like in Revelation 7, the proclamation and the procession. So you have a multitude that are clothed in white robes, holding
Yep.
palm branches. So
Yep.
very much a picture of the procession, all part of the
Absolutely.
divine warrior pattern. And then we have enthronement, of course, in chapters 14. We see the Lamb on the mountain.
Yeah.
Anytime you have mountains, mountains are associated with temples and places of power and rulership.
Sure.
And
Sure.
then then we have a covenant meal. So we talk about that, the Sukkot, the Feast of Booths,
Okay.
and we have this sort of
Yep.
wild meal with the flesh of birds eating, the
That is a
generals and stuff. That's
Sukkoth.
kind of the
That's kind of a
anti
gross and
covenant meal, if you
yeah.
will.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's
That's
a quick
cool.
outline of how I put together sort of the Revelation story within the Exodus story.
That's cool. I've never seen that as an eschatologist. You're saying it's a Sukkot type of a meal, but for the birds, the carrion.
Yeah,
So very interesting.
yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah.
Well,
So,
you,
like
yeah.
I said, that was a pretty quick overview. I really encourage your listeners to get the book, because the goal of the book is for people to really take their time and to really dig in themselves, because I couldn't possibly cover everything. Anyone who writes a book knows that a lot's left on the cutting room floor. You simply have to
Oh,
determine what stays and what goes, with the hope that I've wet your whistle and
sure.
you're encouraged to go and dig deeper.
Okay, so now you opened up Pandora's box. I want to ask you a couple of questions.
Okay.
So let me make a couple of statements first, and then we'll see what you think of it. So we're talking about this warfare. We're talking about the divine type warfare. Dr. Michael Heiser has. Do you remember him at all?
Oh, yes, yes. I've
Okay,
read his
wonderful.
books.
So you know about his little program, the three rebellions. Okay, Genesis 3 rebellions. Somebody rebelled before Adam and Eve, and then Genesis 6, angels came down and mated with women, and then Genesis 10 and 11, we've got Nimrod, we've got Babylon, we've got other things going on. Okay, and
Right.
so three falls. So I've come up with three prison releases kind of based off first Peter, second Peter. It talks about angels in prison, things like that. And then there has to be a release point in Jude 2, but then also Enoch describes the angels in prison. But then eventually in Revelation 9, we see the king angel released to come up and sting people with his troops. I would call them egregores, if that rings a bell at all. These are the top 200
Barely.
angels. Okay, all
Yeah.
right, that's fine. So they would be considered egregores, the top angels, and they would be released out of the abyss, and they'd sting people for 5 months, but they wouldn't die. But then also, and later on in chapter 9, we have in Babylon, we have these creatures released from underneath the Euphrates River, and they come up and they do battle, and they're ultimately going to kill, a third of the earth, which is probably 2 billion people by that point in time. And then the third one is a prison release of the angelic host and the Satan in chapter 12. And you kind of described that already. We've got the good guy, the good warrior being introduced in chapter 12, but also we've got the bad guy, and he seems to be released with a third of the angels at some point in time. So I'm arguing there are the three releases, and so then there are then Heiser would state it this way: there is a great showdown at some point in time. And I argue that could be Mount Hermon. So first, your thoughts on the three prison releases, and then or this fight between good and evil and God, being involved in this because he has to be the one releasing these prisoners, so to speak. Your thoughts?
Well, I tend to err on the side of the 50,000-foot view. I'm really
Go.
not great on the details. I don't tend to go into the details and try to make them fit in various places in my own understanding.
Sure.
I don't know. I'm just not there anymore. I'm
Sure.
trying to give people the big picture. That's really been my goal. And so, as you talk about sort of this battle between good and evil, which is the battle of battles of the ages of the universe, of
Oh yeah.
whatever, it's
The
always,
day of the Lord. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I'm trying to see that in sort of technicolor in a bigger,
Sure.
from a a different perspective. And so again, I keep going back to, sorry for that, but just this constant combat is this combat is the key, because that combat is like a seesaw where it appears at one time, the divine warrior is winning and defeating, and we're, things are great, and then you see the enemy, the chaos creature, the bad guy, the Hasatan, whatever you want to call him, rise up again and again and again, all through the Bible. So the question for us is, so how does God deal with the enemy? And so the stories in the Bible are going to show us, and he doesn't deal with the enemy the same way every time. And he doesn't deal with the enemy by slicing and dicing and trampling and splitting per se. His methods are different. And that's what we're supposed to keep our eye on. And we're supposed to watch for, how does God defeat the enemy in this story? How does God defeat the enemy in that story? So I'm kind of looking at it from that perspective. And I'm really not good
Sci-fi
at sort of
story.
getting into the sort of details of, I'm really no good at the timeline thing and the chronologies at all. I
Let me
leave
have
that to the experts.
Now we're going to have a little bit of fun with this. I was going to let me pop it onto this slide. Let's see here. Um, let's. Oh goodness, mouse problems. Okay, there we go. Rabbi, when are you coming back? And I showed Dina the timeline.
Exactly. Like, I can't, I am always looking for the path of least resistance through the chaos. And
Right.
so when I see something like that, I mean, that just makes my head crazy. And so I'm going to step back and say, okay, how do I navigate through this? So
Yeah.
what is God trying to do? And so to my mind, I don't know when he's coming back.